Elena stood at the altar in a dress that cost more than her car, watching Daniel fumble with his vows. He was nervous, which was sweet. His hands were shaking as he held the little card his mother had insisted he read from. The church was packed with people Elena barely knew. Daniel's colleagues, his parents' country club friends, business associates who'd given them crystal vases they'd never use. Her own side of the church was sparse. A few cousins. Her best friend Maria. Her aunt who'd raised her after her parents died. That was it. Small family. Daniel's mother had said with that pinched smile she wore whenever she talked about Elena's background. The priest cleared his throat, preparing to speak the words that would bind them together forever. And Elena felt a strange flutter in her stomach. Not butterflies. Something else. Something that felt almost like warning. And then the doors at the back of the church opened. Not a gentle opening. A forceful one. The kind that made the heavy would slam against the stone walls with a sound like a gunshot. Every head in the church turned. Elena turned too, her veil shifting across her face, and she saw him. A man in a black suit, perfectly tailored, walking down the aisle like he owned it. He was Korean, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. Cold, beautiful, terrifying. Two men flanked him, also in black, their jackets cut in a way that suggested they were carrying weapons beneath. The man in the center held a briefcase in one hand, and his eyes, dark, intense, emotionless, were locked on Daniel. Daniel's face drained of all color. The vows card slipped from his fingers and fluttered to the floor. "Daniel," Elena whispered, but he didn't look at her. He was staring at the man walking toward them with an expression of pure terror. The man reached the altar and stopped. He set the briefcase down on the marble floor with a deliberate click that echoed through the silent church. Then he looked at Elena for the first time, and she felt the full weight of his gaze. It was assessing, measuring, cataloging everything about her in a single sweeping glance. Then he turned back to Daniel. "You signed a contract," the man said. His voice was low, calm, with a slight accent that made certain words sound almost musical. "The debt is due. I can explain," Daniel stammered. His face had gone from white to a sickly gray. "I just need more time. I can get you the money. I swear." The contract was very clear. The man bent down and opened the briefcase. "Payment in full by today or—" He pulled out a folder and opened it. "You forfeit the collateral." Elena's heart began to pound. "Daniel, what is he talking about? What contract?" Daniel didn't answer. He was backing away from the altar, his eyes fixed on the folder in the man's hands like it contained a death sentence. The man turned the folder around so Elena could see. Inside were photographs. Daniel with other women. Daniel in hotel rooms, restaurants, the back seats of cars. Women who were decidedly not Elena. Dates stamped on the images going back years. Some from just months ago. Elena's breath caught in her throat. "Your fiancé," the man said, his tone conversational, "embezzled approximately $2 million from several of my legitimate business holdings over the past 18 months. When confronted, he begged for mercy. He signed a contract promising repayment with interest. When he could not pay, he offered collateral." He pulled out another document. A contract, signed in Daniel's handwriting. Elena saw the date. 6 months ago, right around the time Daniel had suddenly insisted they move up the wedding date, and she saw the terms. Her name was in the collateral section. "You used me as collateral?" Elena's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the church like a knife. "You bet me? Like property." "Elena, please, let me explain." Daniel reached for her, but the man stepped between them with a fluid grace that made it clear he was used to violence. "Do not touch her." The words were quiet but carried absolute authority. Daniel jerked back as if burned. The man looked at Elena again, and this time his expression softened just a fraction. "Your fiancé gambled that I would never collect on a debt involving a person. He was wrong." Elena felt the world tilting beneath her feet. The church, the flowers, the expensive dress. All of it suddenly felt like a stage set for a play she'd never agreed to be in. She looked at Daniel, at the man she'd spent 5 years with, the man she'd trusted, and she saw a stranger. "Is this true?" she asked. Daniel's mouth opened and closed. I was going to fix it. I was going to. Is this true? Yes. The word came out broken. But Elena, I love you. I never thought. You used me as collateral for stolen money and cheating debts. Elena's voice was shaking now, but not with tears, with rage. You were going to marry me today knowing you'd signed a contract that gave me away like a... She couldn't finish the sentence. She yanked the veil off her head and threw it at Daniel's feet. The man with the briefcase watched this exchange with those dark, unreadable eyes. Then he turned to the priest, who was standing frozen at the altar, looking like he desperately wished he were anywhere else. You have a ceremony to complete, the man said. I will marry her instead. The church erupted. Gasps, whispers, someone's grandmother shrieking about the sanctity of marriage. Daniel's mother stood up, her face red with fury and champagne. Absolutely not. Who do you think you are? You cannot just... The man turned to look at her, and whatever she saw in his face made her sit down immediately and shut her mouth. He turned back to Elena. Your fiancé signed a contract offering you as collateral. The debt is due today. I am here to collect. You have two options. He held up one finger. Option 1, you marry him, in which case both of you will be held responsible for the debt. Daniel's parents have already mortgaged everything they own to pay for this wedding. They have nothing left. You have nothing. The debt will be collected through other means. The way he said other means made Elena's blood run cold. He held up a second finger. Option 2, you marry me. The debt transfers entirely to Daniel. He faces the consequences of his actions alone. You walk away from this church as my wife, but you walk away alive and free from his mistakes. This is insane, Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction, because the alternative, being legally bound to Daniel, being responsible for $2 million in stolen money, being dragged into whatever nightmare he'd created, was worse. Yes, the man agreed. It is. But your fiancé made it necessary. Elena looked at Daniel. He was crying now, actual tears streaming down his face, and he was reaching for her again. Elena, please don't do this. We can figure it out together. I made mistakes, but I love you. You don't love me. Elena's voice was flat. You used me. You lied to me. You cheated on me. And you signed a contract giving me away to save yourself. I panicked. I didn't think. No, you didn't think. You never think about anyone but yourself. She turned back to the man with the briefcase. What's your name? Lee Tae-jin. And if I marry you, what happens to me? You live in my home. You are under my protection. No one touches you. No one harms you. The marriage is legal and binding. But... He paused, and something flickered across his face. I will not force you to be a wife in any way you do not choose to be. Elena understood what he was saying. The marriage would be real on paper, but he wouldn't demand anything physical from her. It was more consideration than Daniel had ever shown. She looked around the church, at Daniel's parents, who were whispering furiously to each other, at Daniel himself, still crying, still reaching for her like she was a life raft, at Maria, her best friend, who was staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. And then she looked at Tae-jin, at this stranger who had walked into her wedding and offered her a way out of a nightmare she hadn't even known she was in. Okay, she said. I'll do it. The church exploded again. Daniel lunged forward, and one of Tae-jin's men caught him by the arm and slammed him back into the first pew with enough force to make the wood creak. Daniel's father stood up, shouting something about calling the police, and Tae-jin turned to him with that same cold, terrifying calm. By all means, call them, Tae-jin said, and explain how your son embezzled $2 million, committed fraud across state lines, and attempted to use a human being as loan collateral. I'm sure they will be very interested in that conversation. Daniel's father sat down. Tae-jin turned back to the priest. Proceed. The priest looked at Elena, his eyes searching her face for, what? Permission? Confirmation that she wasn't being coerced? Elena nodded slowly. The priest swallowed hard and opened his Bible with shaking hands. Before you continue, do me a favor. If the story is already gripping you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because this is about to get even more intense. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The ceremony was a blur. Elena heard herself repeat words, felt Taejin slip a ring onto her finger. Where had he gotten a ring? Felt his hand, warm and calloused, grip hers with surprising gentleness. The priest's voice shook as he pronounced them husband and wife, and when Taejin leaned down to kiss her, it was nothing more than a brief, chaste press of lips to her forehead. Respectful, careful, nothing like the way Daniel had kissed her, all possessive and performative. And then it was done. Taejin kept her hand in his and turned to face the church. No one was smiling. Daniel was slumped in the pew, his head in his hands. His mother was sobbing into a handkerchief. The guests looked stunned. Phones already out. No doubt texting everyone they knew about the insane wedding they'd just witnessed. Taejin led Elena down the aisle. She walked beside him in her expensive dress, her hand in his, and she felt like she was in a dream, or a nightmare. She couldn't tell which. Outside, a black car was waiting. Sleek, expensive, windows tinted so dark she couldn't see inside. One of Taejin's men opened the door, and Taejin helped her in, gathering up the massive skirt of her wedding dress so it wouldn't get caught in the door. He slid in beside her, and the door closed with a heavy thunk that made her feel like she'd just been sealed into a tomb. The car began to move. Elena stared out the window at the church growing smaller behind them, at the guests spilling out onto the steps, at Maria chasing after the car on foot before giving up and standing in the middle of the street with her hands over her mouth. Where are we going? Elena's voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant, like someone else was speaking. My home, Taejin said. You need time to process what just happened. You need space from him. I need, Elena's voice cracked. I need to understand what the hell just happened to my life. Taejin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, your fiancé is a coward and a thief. He stole from me, and when he could not repay the debt, he tried to use you to buy himself more time. I do not negotiate with men like that. I came to collect what was owed. And what was owed was me? According to the contract he signed, yes. Elena closed her eyes. This is insane. This is completely insane. People don't do things like this. This is something out of a movie. And yet here you are. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked at him. He was probably in his mid-30s with a face that gave away nothing. His suit probably cost more than Daniel's car. His watch was understated but clearly expensive. Everything about him screamed power and money and danger. Who are you? She asked. Really? I told you. Lee Taejin. That's a name, not an answer. Taejin studied her for a long moment. Then he said, I run business operations in this city. Some legal, some less so. Your fiancé got involved with the legal side and tried to steal from me. That was a mistake. You're a criminal. I operate in gray areas. That's the same thing. Perhaps. Elena felt hysterical laughter bubbling up in her chest. I just married a criminal to get away from a thief. My life is a joke. Your life, Taejin said quietly, was being used as collateral by a man who claimed to love you. I gave you an alternative. That is all. The car turned a corner, and Elena saw they were heading into the expensive part of the city, where the buildings were all glass and steel and money. She should be scared. She should be terrified. Instead, she just felt numb. What happens now? She asked. Now you rest. Tomorrow we will deal with the fallout. Your family will want answers. So will his. We will give them a story they can accept. What story? That we knew each other before. That when you were with him, you and I reconnected. That when he left you. Taejin's voice hardened. I made a choice. He didn't leave me. You took me. The public story will be that he panicked and ran. That I stepped in. It is cleaner that way. Elena shook her head. You've thought this all through, haven't you? You had this planned. I plan everything. The car pulled up in front of a tall building, all sleek lines and reflective glass. A doorman hurried over to open the car door, and Taejin got out first, then offered Elena his hand. She took it because she didn't know what else to do, and he helped her out of the car. Her dress was absurdly huge, and maneuvering it through the lobby was almost comical. Almost. If her entire life hadn't just imploded. She might have laughed. They took a private elevator to the top floor, and when the doors opened, they opened directly into an apartment that was bigger than any place Elena had ever lived. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the entire city. The furniture was minimalist and expensive. Everything was in shades of gray and white and black, clean lines and careful spaces. It looked like a place where emotions came to die. A woman appeared from one of the side rooms, older, Korean, with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She took one look at Elena in her wedding dress and said something in Korean to Tae-jin, her voice full of concern. Tae-jin responded in the same language, his tone reassuring. The woman nodded and turned to Elena with a gentle smile. "This is Mrs. Kim," Tae-jin said. "She manages my home. She will help you with anything you need." Mrs. Kim gestured toward the hallway, clearly indicating that Elena should follow her. Elena looked at Tae-jin, suddenly panicked at the thought of being separated from the only person who seemed to know what was happening. "Where is she taking me?" Elena asked. "To a room where you can change and rest. You have been through something traumatic. You need time to process." "And what are you going to do?" "I am going to make sure Daniel understands that the debt is now his alone, and that if he attempts to contact you, there will be consequences." The way he said consequences made Elena shiver. "Are you going to hurt him?" "That depends on whether he is smart enough to stay away." Elena wanted to say that she didn't want Daniel hurt, but the words stuck in her throat, because the truth was, after seeing those photographs, after learning what he'd done, she wasn't sure she cared what happened to him. Mrs. Kim touched Elena's arm gently, drawing her attention. She spoke in heavily accented English. "Come. I help you." Elena followed her down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than Elena's college education. Mrs. Kim led her to a bedroom that was easily twice the size of the apartment Elena had shared with Daniel. There was a king-sized bed with crisp white linens, a sitting area with a plush couch, and a door that led to what Elena assumed was a bathroom. Mrs. Kim opened a closet and pulled out comfortable-looking clothes, soft pants, a loose shirt. She set them on the bed and then gestured to Elena's wedding dress, miming unzipping it. Elena stood there numbly while Mrs. Kim carefully undid the hundreds of tiny buttons running down the back of the dress. When it finally fell away, Elena stepped out of it, leaving it in a heap of white silk on the floor. She didn't even care. It was Daniel's mother's choice anyway. Everything about the wedding had been Daniel's mother's choice. Mrs. Kim picked up the dress and carried it away, and Elena was left standing in her underwear in a stranger's bedroom. She caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her makeup was smeared from tears she didn't remember crying. Her hair, which had been professionally styled that morning, was coming loose from its pins. She looked like someone who'd survived a disaster. She walked into the bathroom and found it was enormous and luxurious, with a walk-in shower that had multiple shower heads and a bathtub that could fit 3 people. She turned on the shower as hot as it would go and stepped under the spray, still wearing her bra and underwear because she couldn't bring herself to care. She stood there under the scalding water and finally let herself feel it. The betrayal, the humiliation, the rage, the fear. It all came crashing down on her at once, and she sank to the floor of the shower and sobbed. She cried for the relationship she'd thought she had, for the future she'd planned, for the stupid, naive girl who'd believed Daniel when he said he loved her. She cried until she had nothing left, until her throat was raw and her eyes burned and the water started to run cold. Then she got up, turned off the shower, and dried herself with a towel that was softer than anything she'd ever felt. She put on the clothes Mrs. Kim had left for her. They fit perfectly, which was strange and slightly unsettling, and walked back into the bedroom. She climbed into the bed, pulled the covers up to her chin, and stared at the ceiling. Her phone was still in her bouquet, which was probably still at the church. She had no way to contact anyone. No way to tell Maria she was okay. No way to call her aunt and explain what had happened. She was completely alone in a stranger's apartment, married to a man she didn't know, and her entire life had fallen apart in the span of an hour. And the worst part was the strange, fluttering feeling in her stomach that had been there since this morning. The one that felt like warning. She'd attributed it to wedding nerves, but now she wondered if it had been something else. She pressed a hand to her lower abdomen and felt the slight swell there. So slight that no one would notice unless they were looking for it. But it was there. She was pregnant. She'd known for 2 weeks. She'd been planning to tell Daniel on their honeymoon. Had imagined his face lighting up with joy. Had pictured them celebrating together. Now she didn't know whose baby she was carrying. The thought made her feel sick. 8 weeks ago, she'd gone to a medical conference in Seattle. Daniel had been supposed to come with her, but he'd canceled last minute, work emergency, he'd said. She'd gone alone, and on the last night, she'd gone to the hotel bar and met a man. He'd been Korean, handsome in a severe way, and he'd bought her a drink. They talked for hours. He'd been intelligent, funny in a dry way, and he'd listened to her in a way Daniel never did. She'd been tipsy and reckless and hurt that Daniel had bailed on yet another trip, and when the stranger had offered to walk her to her room, she'd invited him in. She'd woken up the next morning alone, with a note on the pillow that said only, "You deserve better than him." She'd assumed he meant better than a one-night stand. Now she wondered if he'd meant something else. Now she wondered if the stranger in the hotel bar had been Tae-jin. The timeline worked. 8 weeks ago. The baby would have been conceived right around then. But she and Daniel had also been sleeping together, so it could be his. She had no way of knowing. Elena pressed both hands to her face and tried to breathe. This was too much. All of it was too much. There was a soft knock on the door. Elena sat up, pulling the covers around herself like armor. "Come in." Tae-jin entered, carrying a tray. He changed out of his suit into dark pants and a simple black shirt, and he looked more human somehow. Less like a marble statue and more like an actual person. He set the tray down on the nightstand. It held a bowl of soup, some rice, and a cup of tea. "Mrs. Kim made this. You should eat." "I'm not hungry." "You need to eat anyway." Elena looked at the food, and despite everything, her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, and it was now late afternoon. She picked up the soup and took a sip. It was good, rich and flavorful, and exactly what she needed. Tae-jin sat down in the chair across from the bed, watching her eat with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said after a few minutes of silence. "Yes. Why did you really do this?" "The contract thing is an excuse. You could have just taken the money from Daniel in other ways. You didn't need to marry me." Tae-jin was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Your father saved my life." Elena's spoon clattered into the bowl. "What?" 16 years ago, I was trying to leave the organization I worked for. They did not want me to leave. They sent people to kill me. Your father." Tae-jin's expression softened just slightly. "Was a prosecutor. He was investigating the organization. He saw what was happening and intervened. He took a bullet that was meant for me. He died saving my life." Elena felt the room spinning. "My father died in a car accident. That is what you were told. The truth is more complicated. You're lying." "I am not." Tae-jin pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. It was old, grainy, clearly taken on a disposable camera. It showed a younger version of Tae-jin sitting in what looked like a hospital room, and next to him, holding his hand, was Elena's father. Elena's hand shook as she took the phone. She stared at the image, at her father's face, at the way he was smiling despite the bandages wrapped around his chest. "He made me promise," Tae-jin said quietly, "that if anything happened to him, I would look out for you, that I would make sure you were safe. I have been keeping that promise for 16 years. You've been watching me?" Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, from a distance. Making sure you were safe. Making sure you had what you needed. When your aunt could not afford to send you to college, an anonymous scholarship appeared. When you needed a car, a dealership had a sudden promotion. When you got sick 3 years ago and needed surgery, your insurance mysteriously covered everything." Elena set the phone down with shaking hands. "That was all you?" "Yes. Why didn't you just tell me? Why didn't you?" "Because you deserved a normal life. You deserved to grow up without the shadow of what I am hanging over you. But when I discovered what Daniel was doing, when I saw that he was using you, I could not stand by anymore." Elena felt tears burning in her eyes again. "So you married me out of obligation, out of some promise you made to my dead father." No, Taejin leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and he looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I married you because when I saw you standing at that altar, about to bind yourself to a man who did not deserve you, I realized that I could not let it happen. The promise to your father was part of it, yes. But the truth is that I have been watching you for 16 years. Elena, I have seen you grow into a woman of strength and intelligence and compassion. I have seen you survive things that would have broken other people. And he paused, and something flickered across his face. I could not stand the thought of you wasting your life on someone like him. Elena stared at him. You don't even know me. I know you better than you think. Watching someone from a distance is not the same as knowing them. Perhaps not. But I know enough. Elena set the soup aside, no longer hungry. This is insane. All of this is insane. Yes. I should leave. I should walk out of here right now and never look back. You could, Taejin agreed. But where would you go? Back to Daniel? Back to the man who used you as collateral? Back to the apartment you shared with him, filled with his things and his lies. I have friends. I have family. Your aunt lives in a one-bedroom apartment and barely makes ends meet. Your friends. Taejin's expression hardened. Where were they when Daniel was cheating on you? Where were they when he was stealing millions and putting you at risk? Elena flinched because he was right. Maria was her only real friend. And even Maria hadn't known what Daniel was doing. No one had known because Elena had been so determined to make the relationship work that she'd ignored all the warning signs. You are safe here, Taejin said quietly. That is all I am offering. Safety. Time to figure out what you want. And protection from the consequences of his mistakes. And what do you get out of it? Taejin stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. The knowledge that I kept my promise to your father. And, he paused. The knowledge that you are not alone. There was something in his voice, something almost vulnerable, that made Elena wonder what his story was. What had led him to this life? Who was he beyond the cold, terrifying facade? But before she could ask, he turned and headed for the door. Rest. Tomorrow will be difficult. Your phone is on the charger in the living room. One of my men retrieved it from the church. If you need anything, Mrs. Kim is in the guest quarters. My room is at the end of the hall. He left before she could respond, closing the door quietly behind him. Elena sat in the bed, surrounded by expensive sheets in a stranger's home, and tried to make sense of everything that had just happened. Her father had saved Taejin's life. Taejin had been watching over her for 16 years. Taejin had orchestrated this entire thing to save her from Daniel. And she was pregnant with a baby that might be Daniel's or might belong to the man she'd met in that Seattle hotel bar. The man who might have been Taejin. She needed to know. She needed to ask. But she was terrified of the answer. Instead, she lay down and closed her eyes and tried to pretend that when she woke up, this would all have been a bizarre, terrible dream. But sleep was a long time coming. If you're still with me, thank you for being here. This story is about to take some turns you won't see coming. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part. Comment below and tell me. Do you think Taejin is protecting her or trapping her? Let's discuss. The next morning, Elena woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to cover. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The wedding, the briefcase, the photographs, Daniel's face draining of color. Taejin's calm, terrifying voice. I will marry her instead. She sat up and looked around the unfamiliar room. Her wedding dress was gone. Mrs. Kim must have taken it. On the chair where Taejin had sat last night was a set of new clothes, still with tags attached. Jeans in her exact size, a soft sweater, underwear also in her size, which was both thoughtful and deeply unsettling. How did he know her size? How long had he really been watching? Elena got dressed slowly, her mind racing. She needed her phone. She needed to call Maria, call her aunt, figure out what the hell she was going to do. She needed to know if Taejin had been in Seattle 8 weeks ago. When she emerged from the bedroom, the apartment was quiet. Sunlight poured through the massive windows, making the whole space look almost beautiful despite its cold minimalism. She found her phone on the kitchen counter, fully charged, and when she turned it on, it exploded with notifications. 237 missed calls. 584 text messages. Her voicemail was full. Most were from Maria, some from her aunt, a disturbing number from Daniel, and a few from numbers she didn't recognize. Probably reporters or gossip-hungry acquaintances who'd heard about the wedding disaster. She opened Maria's texts first. Elena, where are you? Are you okay? Who was that man? Please call me. I'm so worried. Daniel is losing his mind. His parents are threatening to call the police. Please call me. Elena took a deep breath and dialed. Maria picked up on the first ring. Elena. Oh my God. Are you okay? Where are you? What the hell happened yesterday? Everyone is freaking out. I'm okay, Elena said, and she was surprised to find it was mostly true. I'm safe. Safe where? With that man? Elena, he kidnapped you. He didn't kidnap me. I chose to go with him. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, you chose to marry a complete stranger instead of Daniel? Daniel used me as collateral for a $2 million debt, Maria. He signed a contract offering me like I'm property to cover his gambling and theft. Did you know he was cheating on me? For years. Another silence. Then, quietly, I suspected. Elena's stomach dropped. What? I saw him once, about 8 months ago, at a restaurant with another woman. They were close, holding hands. I confronted him and he said it was a work colleague, that I was reading too much into it. I wanted to tell you, but I thought maybe I was wrong. And you seemed so happy with the wedding planning. You should have told me. I know. I'm so sorry. I should have told you. Elena closed her eyes and leaned against the counter. It doesn't matter now. Where are you? Let me come get you. We can figure this out together. I can't. Not yet. I need time to think. Elena, you married a stranger. A dangerous stranger. Everyone is saying he's involved in organized crime. You can't seriously be staying with him. He saved me, Elena interrupted. When Daniel was willing to throw me away to save himself. This stranger, Taejin, he gave me a way out. By marrying you? It's complicated. It's insane. Maybe, but it's my choice. And right now, I need you to trust me. Maria was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. Okay, but promise me you'll call if you need help. Promise me you'll get out of there if things get weird. I promise. They talked for a few more minutes, and Elena assured Maria she was safe, that she had food and clothes and wasn't being held against her will. When she hung up, she felt marginally better. At least someone knew she was okay. Her aunt had left similar messages. Worried, confused, demanding answers. Elena sent her a text saying she was safe and would explain everything soon. She couldn't face that conversation yet. Then she saw Daniel's messages. Elena, please talk to me. I can explain everything. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. I love you. Please don't do this. That man is dangerous. You don't know what you're doing. Elena, answer me. Fine. You want to throw away 5 years? Be my guest. You'll regret this. The messages devolved from there, getting angrier and more desperate. Elena deleted them without reading further. She blocked his number, blocked his parents' numbers, and blocked anyone else associated with him. She was done. She was looking through her email. More messages from wedding vendors, from Daniel's relatives, from people she barely knew asking if the rumors were true. When Taejin emerged from the hallway, he was dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, his hair styled, looking like he was ready to take over a boardroom or a small country. Good morning, he said. Did you sleep? Eventually. He walked into the kitchen and began making coffee with the ease of someone who actually knew how to use the expensive espresso machine. Your family has been calling. Friends. They are worried. I know. I talked to my best friend. What did you tell her? That I'm safe. That I made a choice. Elena paused. I didn't tell her about my father. About what you said last night. Taejin handed her a cup of coffee, made exactly the way she liked it, cream, no sugar. Another thing he shouldn't have known. That is your story to tell. When you are ready. Elena took the coffee and wrapped her hands around the warm cup. I need to ask you something. Go ahead. 8 weeks ago. Were you in Seattle? Tae-Jin's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Yes. Elena's heart started pounding. Did you, at a hotel bar, did we? Yes. The word hung in the air between them. Elena felt the room tilting again, felt the floor dropping out from under her feet. You knew who I was. Yes. You slept with me knowing who I was. Knowing about Daniel. Knowing you'd been watching me for years. Yes. Why? Elena's voice broke on the word. Why would you do that? Tae-Jin set his coffee down and looked at her directly. Because you deserved one night where someone saw you. Really saw you. Not as Daniel's fiancée. Not as a prosecutor's daughter. Just as Elena. And because he paused. Because I wanted to know if what I felt watching you from a distance was real. And was it? Yes. Elena set her own cup down because her hands were shaking too hard to hold it. I'm pregnant. Tae-Jin went very still. How far along? 8 weeks. The silence stretched between them, heavy and loaded with implications. Tae-Jin's jaw tightened, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something crack in his carefully controlled expression. Is it mine? His voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know. Could be yours. Could be Daniel's. He and I were still. Elena couldn't finish the sentence. She pressed a hand to her stomach. I found out 2 weeks ago. I was going to tell Daniel on our honeymoon. Tae-Jin walked to the window and stood there, his back to her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Elena could see the tension radiating through his entire body. Say something, she said. What would you like me to say? His voice was controlled again, but she could hear the emotion underneath it. I don't know. Tell me what you're thinking. He turned to face her. I am thinking that if the child is mine, I will do everything in my power to be a good father. I am thinking that if the child is Daniel's, I will still protect both of you with my life. I am thinking that regardless of biology, you are my wife now, and that means something to me. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. I don't know what to do. You do not have to decide anything right now. There is time. When will we know whose it is? There are tests, DNA tests, but they cannot be done safely until later in the pregnancy. 16 weeks, perhaps 20. That's months away. Yes. Elena sank down onto one of the bar stools at the kitchen island. This is so messed up. Yes. I don't even know you. No. But you have time to learn. Elena looked up at him. At this man who was her husband, who might be the father of her baby, who had been watching over her for 16 years without her knowing. Why did you leave that note? In Seattle? You said I deserved better than him. Did you mean Daniel? Yes. Why didn't you tell me who you were then? Because you were not ready. You were still trying to make it work with him. If I had told you the truth, about who I was, about your father, about the debt Daniel was accumulating, you would not have believed me. You would have thought I was trying to manipulate you. He was right. She would have. So you slept with me and left. I gave you one night where someone put you first, where someone listened to you, saw you, wanted you for who you are and not what you could provide them. That is all. Elena wanted to be angry. She wanted to accuse him of manipulation, of crossing lines, of being a creep who'd stalked her for years. But the truth was, that night in Seattle had been the first time in months, maybe years, that she'd felt truly seen. The stranger in the bar had asked her about her work, her dreams, her thoughts on things that mattered. Daniel had never done that. I need time, she said. I need to process all of this. Take all the time you need. I want to see proof. About my father. About what you said. Tae-Jin nodded. I will arrange it. Elena stood up. And I want to understand what being married to you actually means. What your world is. What I'm part of now. That is fair. But I need you to be honest with me. Completely honest. No more secrets. I will tell you anything you want to know. Elena took a deep breath. Okay. Then start talking. And he did. Over the next several hours, Tae-Jin told Elena everything. He told her about how he'd been recruited into a crime organization when he was 17, desperate and angry after his parents died. He told her about the violence he'd witnessed, the things he'd done that haunted him. He told her about trying to leave and how her father had intervened, had taken that bullet, had made him promise to be better. He told her about building his own organization from the ground up, about trying to operate in that gray space between legal and illegal, about the enemies he'd made and the people who wanted him dead. He told her about the legitimate businesses he ran, real estate, import-export, tech startups, and the less legitimate ones, gambling, money laundering, protection services. He told her about the code he lived by, the lines he wouldn't cross, the people he protected. He told her that he'd never killed anyone who didn't deserve it, never hurt innocents, never touched the drug trade or human trafficking. He told her the truth, that his world was dangerous, that marrying him made her a target, that there were people who would try to hurt her to get to him. And he told her about his plan to eventually go legitimate, to leave the criminal side of things behind, to build something clean that he could be proud of. Your father believed I could change, Tae-jin said. He saw something in me worth saving. I have spent 16 years trying to prove him right. Elena sat in silence when he finished, processing everything he'd told her. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. It was also, strangely, honest in a way Daniel had never been. Okay, she said finally. Tae-jin raised an eyebrow. Okay, I'll stay, for now, until I figure out what I want. But I have conditions. Name them. I want to continue my work. I'm a pediatric nurse. I'm not giving that up. Agreed. But you will have security. Fine. Second condition. I want to be involved in decisions that affect my life. I'm not just going to sit here and let you make choices for me. Agreed. Third. When the baby comes, if it's yours, you will be an active father. Not just a provider. I want a partner, not a bank account. Something softened in Tae-jin's expression. Agreed. And fourth, Elena paused. If I decide I want to leave, you let me go. No contracts. No obligations. No revenge on Daniel or threats against my family. You just let me go. Tae-jin was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Agreed. Though I hope it does not come to that. So do I, Elena admitted. They looked at each other across the kitchen island, and Elena felt something shift between them. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of understanding. I should call my aunt, Elena said. She deserves to know I'm okay. Use my office. It is more private. Tae-jin showed her to a room down the hall that was all dark wood and leather chairs and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Elena sat at the massive desk and dialed her aunt's number. The conversation was difficult. Her aunt cried. She demanded to know what Elena was thinking. Marrying a stranger. Throwing away her life with Daniel. Elena tried to explain about the debt. About Daniel using her as collateral. But her aunt kept interrupting. You could have just called off the wedding, her aunt said. You didn't have to marry some criminal. He's not. It's complicated, Aunt Rose. Complicated? Elena, your mother would be devastated. My mother is dead, Elena said, and her voice was sharper than she intended. My father is dead, and the man I thought I was going to marry turned out to be a liar and a thief. So yes, I made a choice that seems crazy, but it was my choice. Her aunt was quiet for a moment. Then, more gently, are you safe? Yes. Are you happy? Elena thought about that. I don't know yet, but I'm safe. And right now, that's enough. They talked for a while longer, and by the end, her aunt had calmed down. She made Elena promise to visit soon, to introduce her to Tae-jin properly, to let her see for herself that Elena was okay. When Elena hung up, she felt exhausted. She leaned back in the leather chair and closed her eyes. There was a soft knock on the door. Tae-jin entered, carrying a folder. I have the proof you asked for. About your father. Elena sat up as he handed her the folder. Inside were photographs, her father and a younger Tae-jin, clearly taken in secret by someone documenting their meetings. There were copies of her father's case files, marked classified, detailing his investigation into the crime organization Tae-jin had been part of. There were medical records from the hospital showing the gunshot wound, the surgery, the infection that had ultimately killed him. And there was a letter, written in her father's handwriting, addressed to Tae-jin. Elena's hands shook as she read it. Tae-jin, if you are reading this, I am probably gone. I want you to know that I don't regret what I did. You deserved a chance at a different life, and I was glad I could give you that. I have one request. look after my daughter. Elena is everything good in this world. She is kind and smart and braver than she knows. She deserves to be protected and cherished. If you can do that, if you can make sure she is safe and loved, then my death will have meant something. You have a chance to be better than what you came from. Don't waste it. James Park. Elena's vision blurred with tears. She read the letter 3 times, memorizing every word, every loop of her father's handwriting. He knew, she whispered. He knew he was dying, and he thought about me. He loved you very much, Taejin said quietly. Elena looked up at him. And you've been keeping this promise all these years. Yes. Why didn't you just tell me? Why wait until now? Because you needed to live your own life first. You needed to make your own choices, have your own experiences. I could not hover over you like a guardian angel. That would not have been fair to you. Elena wiped her eyes. Thank you for showing me this. Taejin nodded and turned to leave, but Elena stopped him. Wait, I have one more question. He turned back. That night in Seattle, was it just about keeping a promise to my father? Or was it something else? Taejin looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I told myself it was about the promise. But the truth is, I had been watching you for so long, seeing your strength, your compassion, the way you fought for your patients, the way you tried to see the best in people even when they did not deserve it. And I wanted, he paused, I wanted one night where I could be close to you, where I could talk to you as an equal, not as some shadowy protector. That was selfish of me. Was it just one night for you? Elena asked. Or did you want more? Taejin's jaw tightened. I wanted more, but I knew you were with him. I knew you were trying to build a life. So I took that one night and I left. And now you are my wife, and I will give you whatever you need. Space, time, distance, or... He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Or something more, if you ever want it. Elena stood up and walked over to him. She stopped just in front of him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. I don't know what I want yet, she said honestly. I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if this can ever be real. But I want to try. That is enough, Taejin said. Elena reached up and touched his face, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. He closed his eyes at the contact, and she felt him tremble slightly. For all his control, for all his power, her touch affected him. Kiss me, she said. His eyes opened. Elena, not because of the baby, not because of my father, not because of any obligation. Kiss me because you want to. Taejin cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the strength she could feel in his fingers. I want to, he said. I have wanted to since the moment I saw you. And then he kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste kiss at the altar. This was deep and hungry and full of all the wanting he'd been holding back. Elena kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. He lifted her up, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, and he carried her to the desk, setting her down on it without breaking the kiss. His hands moved to her waist, slipping under her sweater, and Elena gasped at the contact. He pulled back, breathing hard. We should stop, he said, but his hands were still on her skin, his fingers digging into her waist in a way that suggested he didn't really want to stop. Why? Because you are pregnant. Because you have been through something traumatic. Because I do not want you to regret this. Elena pulled him back down to her. I won't regret it. You cannot know that. Maybe not, but I know that I want this. I want you. Right now, in this moment, I am choosing you. Something in Taejin's expression cracked. He kissed her again, and this time there was no holding back. They shed clothes desperately, urgently. And when they came together it was with an intensity that took Elena's breath away. It was different from that night in Seattle. That had been about escape, about pretending to be someone else for a few hours. This was about claiming each other, about making a choice in full knowledge of who they were and what it meant. Afterward, they lay tangled together on the couch in Taejin's office, their breathing slowly returning to normal. Taejin held her close, his hands splayed protectively over her stomach where their baby, or Daniel's baby, was growing. No regrets? He asked softly. Elena thought about it. About Daniel and the wedding that had fallen apart. About her father and the promise Tajin had kept. About the uncertain future and the baby whose paternity was unknown. No regrets, she said, and she meant it. Hey, if you're still here, you're amazing. This story has so many more twists coming. Hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below. Do you think the baby is Tajin's or Daniel's? What do you think Daniel will do next? Let me know your theories. Over the following weeks, Elena settled into her new life. She returned to work at the hospital, though now she had a security detail that followed her everywhere. Two quiet men in dark suits who sat in the hospital cafeteria and watched her floor. Her co-workers whispered. Some were supportive, others were judgmental, but Elena had stopped caring what people thought. She was too busy trying to figure out who she was now that her entire life had changed. Daniel tried to contact her multiple times. He showed up at the hospital once, and Tajin's security escorted him out so quickly that he barely made it through the lobby. He sent letters, emails, even tried to reach her through mutual friends. All of them went unanswered. Elena heard through Maria that Daniel's life was falling apart. His parents had cut him off financially. The legal consequences of his embezzlement were catching up with him. He'd been fired from his job and was facing criminal charges. Elena felt nothing when she heard this. Not satisfaction. Not pity. Just nothing. That chapter of her life was closed. Her life with Tajin was strange but not unpleasant. He was gone most days, handling business she didn't ask about. But when he was home, he was attentive in a way Daniel had never been. He asked about her day, listened when she talked about difficult cases at work, made sure she was eating enough now that the morning sickness had started. They had dinner together most nights. Sometimes they talked for hours. Other times they sat in comfortable silence. And sometimes, when the tension between them became too much to bear, they ended up in bed together, and Elena learned that her husband was as controlled and intense in private as he was in public. But they didn't talk about the baby. They didn't talk about what would happen when the paternity test could finally be done. That hung between them like a sword waiting to fall. Elena was 12 weeks along when Daniel broke into the apartment. She was alone. Tajin was at a meeting, Mrs. Kim had gone to the market, and she was making herself tea when she heard the door to the penthouse open. She turned, expecting Tajin, and froze when she saw Daniel standing there. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight. His clothes hung off him, and there were dark circles under his eyes. But worse than his physical appearance was the look in his eyes. Wild, desperate, unhinged. "Elena," he said, and his voice was rough, like he'd been screaming. "We need to talk." Elena's hand moved to her phone, but Daniel was faster. He crossed the room and knocked it out of her hand, sending it skittering across the floor. "Don't," he said. "Don't call him. Don't call anyone. Just listen to me. How did you get in here?" Elena's voice was surprisingly steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I followed one of the delivery people. Slipped in behind them. I've been watching this place for weeks, Elena. Waiting for a chance to talk to you. We have nothing to talk about." "Yes, we do." Daniel's voice rose. "You're my fiancé. We were supposed to get married. We were supposed to have a life together. You threw that away when you used me as collateral. I made a mistake. I panicked. But I love you, Elena. I still love you. You don't love me, Daniel. You never did. You loved what I could give you. The respectability. The stability. Someone to clean up your messes." Daniel's expression twisted. "That's not true. I loved you. I still love you. And I know you still love me too. You have to. We were together for 5 years. "I don't love you," Elena said, and the words came out clear and certain. "I don't think I ever really did. I loved the idea of you, the future I thought we'd have. But you? No." Daniel flinched like she'd hit him. "You're just saying that because of him. He's brainwashed you. He's been honest with me," Elena interrupted. "Which is more than you ever were." "Honest." Daniel laughed, and it was a harsh, bitter sound. "He's a criminal, Elena. He kills people. He breaks the law. And you think that's better than me? He's never lied to me. He's never pretended to be something he's not. And he's never, ever used me." Daniel took a step toward her and Elena took a step back. "I can give you everything back," he said desperately. We can start over. I'll be better. I'll change. Just leave him and come back to me. No. Elena, please. I said no. Daniel's expression darkened. Fine. You won't leave him willingly? Then I'll make you. He lunged forward, grabbing her arm. Elena screamed and tried to pull away, but his grip was iron-tight. He started dragging her toward the door, and Elena fought him, clawing at his hands, kicking at his shins. Let me go. You're coming with me. We're going to leave this city. Start over somewhere he can't find us. You'll see. You'll remember why you loved me. Elena's hand closed around a vase on the side table. She swung it at Daniel's head with all her strength. It connected with a sickening crack, and Daniel stumbled backward, releasing her arm. Blood streamed down his face from a gash on his temple. You bitch, he snarled, and he came at her again. Elena ran for the kitchen, desperately looking for something she could use as a weapon. Her hand closed around a knife just as Daniel grabbed her from behind. They struggled, and Elena felt the knife slip from her grip, heard it clatter to the floor. Daniel spun her around and slammed her against the counter. His hands closed around her throat. You're mine, he hissed. You've always been mine, and if I can't have you, no one will. Elena couldn't breathe. She clawed at his hands, kicked at him, but he was stronger. Her vision started to blur. She thought about the baby, about Tae-jin, about how stupid she'd been to think she was safe. And then suddenly Daniel was gone, ripped away from her so violently that he crashed into the opposite wall. Tae-jin stood between them, and Elena had never seen such rage on a human face. He looked like he wanted to tear Daniel apart with his bare hands. You put your hands on my wife, Tae-jin said, and his voice was so cold it made Elena shiver. You tried to strangle her. In my home. Daniel scrambled to his feet, blood still streaming from his head wound. She's not your wife. She's mine. She was never yours. Tae-jin took a step forward. She was a convenient prop in your pathetic life. And now you have nothing. Daniel pulled something from his jacket. A gun. Elena screamed, but Tae-jin was already moving. He grabbed Daniel's wrist and twisted, and the gun went off with a deafening bang that made Elena's ears ring. The bullet hit the ceiling. Plaster rained down. Tae-jin wrenched the gun from Daniel's hand and threw it across the room. Then he grabbed Daniel by the throat and lifted him off the ground, slamming him against the wall. Tae-jin, don't! Elena shouted. Don't kill him. He's not worth it. Tae-jin's grip tightened, and Daniel's face started to turn purple. For a moment, Elena thought he was going to ignore her, thought she was going to watch her husband kill her ex-fiancé. But then Tae-jin released him, letting Daniel drop to the floor in a gasping heap. You are not worth the consequences, Tae-jin said coldly. He pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking rapidly in Korean. Within minutes, the apartment was full of people. Tae-jin's security team, the building's security, and, surprisingly, police officers. Tae-jin had called the police. This man, Tae-jin said, gesturing to Daniel, broke into my home and assaulted my wife. I want him arrested. The officers looked uncertain. They clearly recognized Tae-jin and knew his reputation, but Elena's testimony and the security footage from the building's cameras told the story clearly. Daniel had broken in. He had attacked her. He had pulled a gun. They arrested him, read him his rights, and dragged him out of the apartment still protesting, still screaming that Elena belonged to him. When they were gone, when the apartment was quiet again except for the crime scene techs photographing the scene, Tae-jin turned to Elena. She was sitting on the couch, shaking, one hand pressed to her throat where bruises were already forming. Tae-jin knelt in front of her and gently moved her hand away, examining the marks Daniel had left. His jaw clenched. Did he hurt the baby? His voice was rough. I don't know. I don't think so. But I need to go to the hospital. I need to make sure. I will take you. At the hospital, Elena was examined thoroughly. The doctor confirmed that the baby was fine, heartbeat strong, no signs of trauma. Elena burst into tears of relief. Tae-jin held her hand through the entire examination, and when the doctor left them alone, he pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried. I am sorry, he said into her hair. I should have been there. I should have protected you better. You couldn't have known he'd break in. I should have anticipated it. I knew he was desperate. I should have had someone with you at all times. Elena pulled back to look at him. It's not your fault. It's his, and it's over now. Is it? Taejean's expression was grim. He tried to kill you, Elena. He will go to prison, but when he gets out, then we'll deal with it when that happens. Together. Something in Taejean's expression softened. Together. They left the hospital and went home. And that night, Elena slept in Taejean's arms, feeling safer than she had in weeks. Daniel was charged with breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, and attempted kidnapping. With his prior embezzlement charges, he was looking at serious prison time. His parents hired expensive lawyers, but the evidence was overwhelming. Elena testified at his trial. She looked him in the eye and told the jury everything, about the contract, about the collateral, about the cheating, about the attack. Daniel's lawyers tried to paint her as a scorned woman who'd run off with a criminal, but the evidence didn't lie. Daniel was convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to 15 years. When the verdict was read, Daniel looked at Elena one last time. There was no love in his eyes anymore, only hate. Elena looked back at him and felt nothing. She walked out of the courtroom with Taejean at her side and didn't look back. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, do me a favor. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves a good drama. Comment below and tell me what you think of Elena's choices. Would you have done the same? Elena was 16 weeks pregnant when she and Taejean went for the appointment that would change everything. The doctor was one of Taejean's personal physicians, discreet, expensive, and willing to do the paternity test without asking uncomfortable questions. Elena lay on the examination table while the doctor drew blood for the DNA test. Taejean had already provided his sample. Daniel's DNA would be pulled from evidence the police had collected during his arrest. Results will take about a week, the doctor said. I'll call you as soon as they're ready. That week was the longest of Elena's life. She and Taejean didn't talk about what the results might mean. They existed in a strange limbo, both terrified and hopeful in equal measure. Elena found herself studying Taejean, looking for signs that he would leave if the baby wasn't his, looking for cracks in his composure. But he remained steady, attentive, present. One night, she woke up to find him standing at the window, looking out at the city lights. Can't sleep? She asked. He turned. I keep thinking about what happens if the baby is his. Elena sat up. What do you want to happen? I want. Taejean paused. I want to be this child's father, regardless of biology. But I do not know if that is fair to you, or to the child. Elena got out of bed and walked over to him. She took his hand and placed it on her belly, which was just starting to show a small bump. Feel that? She said softly. What? That's your baby. Maybe not biologically. Maybe it is. But you're the one who's been here. You're the one who holds me when I'm sick. You're the one who asks how I'm feeling. You're the one who reads pregnancy books when you think I'm not looking. Taejean's hand trembled slightly against her stomach. I want this to be real. I want us to be real. We are real. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, slow and deep and full of all the emotions he usually kept locked away. When the doctor finally called, Elena and Taejean were sitting together on the couch. Elena had her head on his shoulder, and he was reading to her from a book about infant care that he'd bought and been too embarrassed to mention. Taejean answered the phone on speaker. Yes, Mr. Lee, I have the results of the paternity test. Elena sat up, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Taejean's hand found hers and gripped tight. And Taejean's voice was steady, but Elena could feel the tension in his body. The baby is yours, Mr. Lee. There is a 99.9% match. Congratulations. Elena burst into tears. Taejean closed his eyes and pulled her into his arms, and she felt his whole body shudder with relief. Thank you, doctor, he said, his voice rough. When he hung up, they held each other for a long time, neither speaking, just breathing together. Finally, Elena pulled back and looked at him. You're going to be a father. We are going to be parents, Taejean corrected. He cupped her face in his hands. I love you, Elena. I have loved you for so long, and I will love this baby with everything I have. I love you too, Elena said, and she realized it was true. Somewhere between the disaster wedding and the broken-in apartment and the long nights talking, she had fallen in love with her husband. They kissed, and it felt like a promise. The pregnancy progressed smoothly after that. Elena's belly grew, and Taejin was there for every appointment, every ultrasound, every midnight craving for bizarre food combinations. He was also there when Elena's water broke at 3 a.m., 6 weeks before they'd expected it. It's too early, Elena said, gripping his hand as a contraction ripped through her. Taejin, it's too early. We will be fine, he said, but she could see the fear in his eyes. I am calling the doctor. We are going to the hospital. Everything will be fine. The labor was fast and intense. Elena barely made it to the hospital before the baby was coming. Taejin held her hand through all of it, letting her squeeze until his bones creaked, whispering encouragement in her ear, wiping the sweat from her face. And then, after what felt like an eternity, their daughter was born. She was tiny, barely 5 pounds, and her cry was thin and reedy, but she was alive. The doctors whisked her away to the NICU, and Elena reached for Taejin, terrified. She'll be okay, he promised. She is strong, like her mother. They named her Rose, after Elena's aunt, and Elena had never seen Taejin cry until the moment the nurses let him hold his daughter for the first time. He cradled her against his chest, tears streaming down his face, and he whispered promises to her in Korean that Elena couldn't understand but felt in her soul. Rose spent 3 weeks in the NICU, but she grew stronger every day. And when they finally brought her home, Elena stood in the nursery that Taejin had spent months preparing and felt like her life had finally found its purpose. Taejin wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they watched their daughter sleep. Thank you, he said softly. For what? For giving me this. For giving me a family. For giving me a reason to be better. Elena turned in his arms and kissed him. Thank you for saving me. You saved yourself. I just gave you an option. Elena thought back to that day in the church, to Daniel throwing the ring at her, to Taejin walking down the aisle with that briefcase full of evidence. Felt like a lifetime ago. Felt like yesterday. No regrets? She asked, echoing the question he'd asked her months ago. Taejin looked at her, at their daughter sleeping peacefully in her crib, at the life they'd built from the ashes of Elena's broken wedding. No regrets, he said, and he meant it. 5 years later, Elena pushed Rose on the swing in the private playground behind their house. They'd moved out of the penthouse when Rose turned 2, and watched her daughter's delighted squeals fill the air. Higher, Mama. Higher. Any higher and you'll fly away. Elena laughed, but she pushed harder anyway. Taejin was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Over the years, he'd slowly extricated himself from the more dangerous aspects of his business. He still operated in gray areas, still had connections and power, but he'd kept his promise to Elena's father. He was better now. Their life wasn't perfect. There were still threats occasionally, still enemies who tried to use Elena or Rose to get to Taejin. But they handled it together as a family. Elena's phone rang. She pulled it out and saw Maria's name. She answered with one hand while continuing to push Rose with the other. Hey, are we still on for lunch tomorrow? Absolutely. And I have news, Maria said, her voice excited. I'm engaged. Maria, that's amazing. Tell me everything. As Maria launched into the story of her proposal, Elena watched Taejin emerge from the house, carrying a glass of lemonade for her. He'd changed over the years, softer somehow, more open. Fatherhood suited him. He handed her the lemonade and dropped a kiss on her forehead before moving to catch Rose as she jumped from the swing, shrieking with laughter. Elena watched her husband swing their daughter around, watched them collapse in a giggling heap on the grass, and felt a wave of contentment wash over her. Elena, you still there? Maria asked. Yeah, sorry. Just watching my family. You sound happy. I am, Elena said, and she meant it. I really, really am. After she hung up, she joined Taejin and Rose on the grass. Rose immediately climbed into her lap, and Taejin wrapped his arms around both of them. What are you thinking about? He asked. Elena thought about Daniel, who was still in prison and would be for years. She thought about the wedding that had fallen apart and the stranger who had walked in and changed everything. She thought about her father's letter and the promise Taejin had kept. "I'm thinking," Elena said, "that sometimes the worst day of your life is actually the beginning of the best thing that ever happened to you." Taejin pulled her closer. "And what is the best thing?" Elena looked at him, at this man who had saved her and loved her and built a life with her. She looked at their daughter, who had his eyes and her stubborn chin. She looked at the home they'd created, full of laughter and love and second chances. "This," she said simply. "All of this." Rose tugged on Taejin's shirt. "Daddy, I'm hungry." "Then we should eat," he said, standing and pulling both Elena and Rose to their feet. They walked into the house together, hand in hand, and Elena thought about how far she'd come from that church, from that moment when her life had imploded. She'd been so scared that day, so humiliated, so certain that her life was over. She'd had no idea it was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know what you think. Was Taejin right to step in the way he did? Do you think Elena and Taejin's relationship is healthy? What would you have done in Elena's position? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this one. Share this with someone who loves a good romance with a twist. And if you're wondering what happened to Daniel, well, maybe that's a story for another time.